The military policy of Rome became more hostile, between 449 and 390 BC. A Gallic chieftain called Brennus, about 390 BC, led the Senones, a tribe of Gauls, into Italy. Brennus defeated a Roman army, and captured, sacked, and burned Rome about 387 BC, which were great disasters, but the defeat of the Romans was only temporary. Rome's major conquest came with the capture of the Etruscan city of Veii, in 396 BC, by a Roman soldier and statesman, Marcus Furius Camillus, who lived from 448 to 365 BC. He led the Roman army against rival cities in Etruria, conquering Veii, in 396 BC, Caepna in 395 BC, and Phalrii in 394 BC, which ended Etruscan independence. Other Etruscan cities hurried up to make peace, and by the middle of the 4th century BC, all southern Etruria was kept under control by Rome's defense force, and removed from government control by invasions of Roman colonists. Rome occupied Veii's territory, and enrolled her citizens as Roman citizens, which significantly increased Roman territory and labor force. The Latins and Volscians revolted, but was put down in 338 BC. The Latin League was a long-established confederation of the cities of Latium that had been dissolved, but the Northern Confederacy was not defeated until 283 BC, and the southern states soon after. Victories over the Volscians, the Latins, and the Hernicans gave the Romans control of central Italy, and brought them into repeated conflict with the Samnites, a powerful tribal coalition of southern Italy in the second half of the 4th century BC. The coalition was formed against Rome, consisting of Samnites, Lucanians, and Bruttians in the south, and Etruscans, Umbrians, and Gauls in the north. Rome's power was endangered by this coalition. However, they were defeated in a series of 3 wars, extending from 343 to 290 BC. At the end of the Third Samnite War in 298 BC, Romans defeated the combined Samnite and Gaul army at the Battle of Sentinum, and had become the most powerful state in Italy. Rome was now on the threshold of overseas expansions, with only a small fleet. It was not a naval power. However, it had treaties and alliances that brought them into contact with maritime states that led to many relationships formed beyond Italy. Rome's relationship with the East brought them into the affairs of the Macedonia and Greece. A series of treaties were concluded with Carthage, the greatest mercantile power in the western Mediterranean, and when Rome moved into Campania and then southern Italy, it secured alliances with important Greek trading centers such as Naples. During the Hellenistic period, one of Alexander's generals was Pyrrhus. He lived from 319 to 272 BC, he was king of Epirus in 295 to 272 BC. He sought by military means to find a way into the Greek region of Italy. Rome had installed in the city of Thurii a garrison supported by a small fleet. This provoked the city of Tarentum, modern-day Taranto, who had long considered itself to be the dominant Greek city in Magna Graecia. The Tarentines sunk the Roman fleet and captured Thurii, but now having stirred up the wrath of Rome, they called on Pyrrhus for help. Pyrrhus, a skilled general, in that same year crossed the sea from Greece with his army in 280 BC, to assist the Greek colonies of southern Italy against Rome, and defeated the Romans at Heraclea in 280 BC, and again, defeated the Romans at the Battle of Asculum in 279 BC. After failing to convince Rome to accept peace on his terms, Pyrrhus, in 278 BC departed for Sicily to assist the Greek cities there against Carthage. Pyrrhus' campaigns in Italy, and on the island of Sicily from 280 to 275 BC, were successful triumphs, and the term Pyrrhic victory originated. Although he triumphed, it cost him drastically, and at one point, he exclaimed, "One more such victory and I am lost." Rome had advanced in manpower and the strength of Rome's coalition had worn Pyrrhus down. Pyrrhus returned to Italy in 275 BC, but this time he was badly defeated at the Battle of Beneventum in 275 BC. He then left Italy and returned to Greece. His campaigns in Italy and on the island of Sicily from 280 to 275 BC, were successful, and after being defeated by the Romans at Beneventum he withdrew to Greece, where he was killed besieging Argos. After his death in 272 BC, the garrison at Tarentum surrendered the city to the Romans. This left all Italy subject to Rome in 274 BC. During the next 10 years, the Romans completed their subjugation of Messapiae, an Indo-European people that inhabited the southeastern peninsula, in the southeast of southern Italy, and Umbrians and Pientes, an Italian tribe, northern Adriatic coastal plain in Italy, in the north, which they gained control of the entire peninsula, as far north as the Arno and Rubicon rivers. It was a 6-year war of Pyrrhus and the Romans. By 264 BC, Rome had secured social unity by equalizing the grievances of the plebeians, and it had increased its military might by conquering Italy, giving it the human resources with which it would later conquer the Mediterranean world. In 264 BC, 11 years after the victory over Pyrrhus, Rome was successful in securing social unity and increasing its military might in conquering Italy, and by resolving the grievances of the plebeians. However, with Rome's association and links to the commercial seaport, it soon involved confrontation with Carthage. Rome was brought into direct contact with the commercial routes to Hellenistic Greece. Rome became involved in conflicts with Carthage, in a struggle for the control of the Mediterranean Sea. Carthage at this time was the foremost naval power in the world, ruling as absolutely, in the central and western Mediterranean, as did Rome on the Italian peninsula. Greeks and Carthaginians had long been bitter and often violent rivals. Renewed hostilities in the 260s BC brought Rome into play for the first time. Punic Wars was the name given to the 3 distinct wars between Rome and Carthage during the 3rd and 2nd centuries BC, in which Rome became the leading power in the western Mediterranean. Punic is an adjective derived from the Latin word, punicus. Carthaginians were of Phoenician descent, and the Romans knew them by the name Punic. Early relations with the Romans and Carthaginians had been pleasant, but the Carthaginian occupation of Sicily, prompted by commercial interest, threatened the trade and security of Rome's allies, the Greek cities of southern Italy. In the 3rd century BC, concerned mainly for the control of Sicily, Carthage engaged in wars continually with Greece and Rome. During that time, Carthage and Rome were 2 equals having an equivalent military power, wealth, and population. Carthage dominated the western Mediterranean and its empire comprised the nations of North Africa and coastal regions of southern Spain, Sardinia, Corsica, and western Sicily. Rome dominated the entire peninsula as far as the Arno and Rubicon rivers. Roman domination included Messapiae in the southeast of southern Italy, Umbrians and Pientes in the north. At the beginning of the 2nd century BC, Italy was developing from federal conditions towards full social unity. At the completion of Rome unifying Italy, Rome became a union, known as the Roman-dominated Italian Confederation, from 200 to 186 BC. There were 4 other great powers in the Mediterranean during the same time. It would take Rome 120 years later, until Rome brings these states to its dominion. These 4 great powers were, the Seleucid monarchy in the Near East, the Ptolemaic monarchy in Egypt, the Kingdom of Macedonia, and Carthage in the western Mediterranean. The First Punic War started in 264 BC, and lasted for 23 years. The conflict between Rome and Carthage was the result of growing political and economic rivalry between the 2 nations. The war was waged mainly for the control of Sicily. The Romans built a fleet to challenge the naval strength of Carthage, when Hiero II, king of Syracuse, fought against the Mamertines of Messina, now present-day Messina. One party of the Mamertines asked first Carthage for help, and the other party called on Rome against Hiero II of Syracuse. The Strait of Messina, which separates the Italian peninsula from Sicily, was of extreme importance, and both powers responded. Carthage had already controlled part of Sicily, Rome controlled part, and Romans responding to this request with the intention of driving the Carthaginians from the island, provoked a declaration of war. The Carthaginian army arrived in Sicily first, and arranged a peace between Messina and Syracuse, and established a garrison. Upon its arrival, the Roman army ejected the Carthaginians from the garrison, and so the war began. Rome's intervention to help Messina led to the First Punic War that started in 264 to 241 BC. Rome and Carthage declared war on each other for the control of Sicily. The war ended in the following year with a major naval victory for the Romans in 241 BC, and that left them in control of the Mediterranean Sea. The whole of Sicily was surrendered to the Romans, and it became its first foreign possession, and the first Roman province in 241 BC. Rome also seized the Carthaginian islands of Sardinia and Corsica in 237 BC, and annexed them as Roman provinces soon after. Illyria was an ancient region on the eastern and northeastern coasts of the Adriatic Sea, what is now Yugoslavia. In the early 7th to the 6th centuries BC, Greece established colonies in the region. In the 4th century BC, Illyria was partially conquered by Macedonia. The Illyrians were a warlike people with petty kings who lived by and practiced piracy from 228 BC to 219 BC. The Romans waged victorious wars against the Illyrian pirates. The first instance of Roman power in Greece was in 228 BC, when the Roman navy first crossed the Adriatic Sea. This brought on two Illyrian wars that were two wars fought mainly against piracy between Rome and Illyria. The Roman Republic completed the conquest of Illyria in 168 BC, by defeating the army of the last Illyrian king Gentius, at Scodra, now Lake Scutari, Albania. After capturing Gentius, he was taken to Rome, and he surrendered the capital of Scodra to Rome in 165 BC. Rome was interested in Illyria because the region had a number of important commercial ports along its coastlines. Rome conquered all Illyria including Dalmatia, and it became a Roman province in the 1st century BC. The Romans established a colony, which they called Illyricum. Under Roman rule, Illyria enjoyed great prosperity, and much construction of roads and towns were built. When Rome sent ambassadors to inform the Greeks with the defeat of Illyria, they were highly grateful, and this brought the Romans in favor with the Greeks, so much so that Athens gave them freedom of their city. 2 decades later, Rome faced an even sterner test. Carthage had extended its conquests in Spain between the Tagus and Iberus rivers, with the exception of the Roman dependency of Saguntum, which was taken after a siege of 8 months. In 218 BC, a brilliant young Carthaginian general named Hannibal, who lived from 247 to 182 BC, sworn by his father, Hamilcar Barca, to undying hatred toward Rome, who was a bitter rival of Carthage, that he would defend Carthage. The string of victories marked his campaigns by attacking Saguntum, a Roman ally in Spain of 219 BC, and defeated the Romans at Trasimene, in 217 BC, including a major triumph at Cannae in 216 BC, during which as many as 40,000 Romans fell. The Romans named this attack a violation of the existing treaty between Rome and Carthage, and demanded that Carthage surrender Hannibal to them. On the refusal of the Carthaginians to do so, the Romans declared war on Carthage in 218 BC, thus starting the Second Punic War. In 218 BC, Hannibal, with a vast army of 25,000 men and 40 elephants, from Spain crossing the Alps into Italy in 218 BC, advanced the Second Punic War. He invaded the Italian peninsula. But he was defeated by Scipio Africanus, at Zama in 202 BC. After 15 years, in 202 BC, and with the military fortunes of Carthage rapidly declining, Hannibal was recalled to Africa to direct the defense of his country against a Roman invasion under Scipio Africanus the Elder. He met Scipio at Zama, North Africa, and his troops fled, many deserting to the Romans, and his veterans were cut down. Carthage yielded to Rome, and the Second Punic War finally ended. Roman expeditionary force, led by Scipio Africanus, won a crucial victory over the Carthaginians at Zama in North Africa. In 195 BC, Hannibal was forced to withdraw from Italy and went into exile. When Rome demanded his life, he later committed suicide to avoid being captured. The next year at the peace settlement, Rome received Spain. Rome became the sole great power in the western Mediterranean at the end of the Second Punic War. In 3 wars between 215 BC and 168 BC, Rome broke the power of Macedonia. It took 50 years for Rome to defeat the Carthaginians at Zama, making them the mightiest state in the east. In the beginning of the Macedonian Wars, fear that the Hellenistic kingdoms of Macedon and Syria would ally to invade the Italian peninsula, Roman armies were sent against the countries. After defeating them in several battles, they left with plunder. Rome moved forward into a Second Macedonian War in 200 to 197 BC, by conquering and defeating Philip V, king of Macedonia, whose motivation was to dominate the Aegean Sea. Greece was liberated, and a union followed. Rome's entrance into the political kingdoms of the Hellenistic world, and its intervention in Greece, led it to come upon the Near East nations of Asia Minor, Syria, under the Seleucid dynasty, Egypt, under the Ptolemaic dynasty, and Pergamum. In 190 BC, Rome went against Antiochus III, king of Syria, and defeated him at Magnesia. Antiochus III surrendered his possessions in Europe and Asia Minor. In western Greece, Philip's son and successor, Perseus, in 212 to 166 BC, fought a third and final Macedonian war with the Romans. Perseus's army surrendered and he was captured in 146 BC by the general Aemilius Paulus in 229 to 160 BC. The Hellenistic states became client kingdoms of Rome and consequently lost their freedom of action in foreign affairs. By the middle of the 2nd century BC, Roman armies had conquered Macedonia, and it became a province of Rome in 148 BC. In the same year that Macedon became a Roman province, a revolt of the Achaean League in Greece sprung up, resulting in the seizure and destruction of the city-state of Corinth in Greece, and the ruin of the great seaport of Rhodes by making Delos a free port. Thousands of people from Greece and the Near East were enslaved and sent westward to Rome along with much treasure. In 149 BC, a third Punic War was launched by a group of Romans led by Cato the Elder, demanding that Carthage be destroyed. Rome was not comfortable with the growing commercial and political power of Carthage, therefore, a general statesman, and Roman soldier named Publius Cornelius Scipio Aemilianus Africanus Minor, who lived from in 185 to 129 BC, was the commander in the Third Punic War, who with a succession of Spanish campaigns, captured and destroyed Carthage in 146 BC, and ended with the destruction of Numantia, in 133 BC, bringing an end to the Carthaginian Empire, ending the Third Punic War. The territory became the Roman province of Africa, with only a few remnants of Carthaginian civilizations persisting. Rome's dominion over the Hellenistic world was certain. Rome eliminated Carthage as a great power in the ancient world, and Rome sold Carthaginian survivors into slavery. In conclusion, Rome eliminated Carthage as a great power in the ancient world, and Rome became the supreme power in the Mediterranean from Syria westward to Spain. Attalus III, Philometor Euergetes, the last Attalid king of Pergamum, who ruled from 138 to 133 BC, died, and bequeathed his kingdom to Rome, and in a very short time this territory was formed into the Roman province of Asia. While Rome was out establishing its foreign supremacy, the Roman Republic was in crises, having internal troubles at home with the noble families of the senatorial rank. The plebeian families had gained status into the Republic combined with the patrician families, who jointly continue to exclude all but themselves from the high office or function of the magistrate and senate. They had become rich, but selfish, arrogant, and had fell to the low standard of morality and integrity. With the growth of large estates, owned by the government, and large tracts of farmland that it had acquired through invasion, were rented out to large landowners, whose slaves tilled their land, or who subleased to small tenant farmers. The gradual decline in farm workers led to a system of slave labor. The ruling upper-class aristocracies had a need for a labor force to maintain the upkeep of their property. Conflicts between the aristocratic party and the popular party began. A period of political instability and social unrest arose, and it eventually led to the fall of the Roman Republic. Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus was a Roman leader who took office as a tribune in 133 BC. He was born in 169 BC, but he died in June of 133 BC. He tried to bypass the Roman Senate and pass a law limiting the amount of land belonging to the state that any individual could farm. This would have resulted in the breakup of large plantations, maintained by the rich on public land and worked by slaves. He and his brother, Gaius Sempronius Gracchus, who lived from 153 to 121 BC, were both trying to redress the grievances of displaced small landholders, by attempting to reform the agricultural laws in favor of the poorer citizens, which only resulted in riots, and their violent deaths at the hand of the aristocratic faction. The expansion of Rome's territory continued. Gaius Marius, who lived from 157 to 86 BC, was a Roman general that was victorious in Africa over Teutones and Jugurtha, king of Numidia in 106 BC. He was the leader of the Popular Party, and opposed Sulla in 88 to 86 BC, in the first of the great civil wars at Rome. He became the political rival of Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a Roman soldier and statesman in 138 to 78 BC, who consul in 88 BC, defeated Mithridates VI of Pontus, overthrew his political opponents at Rome, and was made dictator with extraordinary powers. Sulla forbid his enemies, and reinstates the power of the Senate, establishing a moderately aristocratic constitution. This pattern of autocratic rule, followed by other military commanders, eventually overthrew the Roman Republic. War broke out between Marius and Sulla, and a slave revolt under Spartacus followed. During the 1st century BC, while Rome was pursuing to become an empire, the Republic suffered heavily from domestic and foreign wars. Thousands of Italians died in the civil wars between 91 and 82 BC. The Republic collapsed from within from social and economic factors. While Rome was fighting its Italian allies, Mithridates, king of Pontus in northern Asia Minor, invaded the Roman province of Asia. In 88 BC, he incited the local populations to massacre 80,000 Italian residents of the province. The Triumvirate was applied to the political association, to which a coalition was formed representing different classes of people, but depending upon the army for support. This sort of coalition was created by three men, a general and statesman, Pompey the Great, who lived from 106 to 48 BC, a Roman statesman, soldier, and author, Julius Caesar, who lived from 102 to 44 BC, and a rich Roman politician and entrepreneur, Marcus Licinius Crassus, who lived from 115 to 53 BC. They formed a union to siege power and were the first coalition known as the First Triumvirate. The First Triumvirate, three-man dictatorship, was established after the slave revolt under Spartacus, in 60 BC. The Gracchus brothers attempted to reform the agrarian laws, but civil war broke out because of it. A huge task to govern the Mediterranean world, resulted in class opposition in Rome. The task was even harder when rivalries developed between Marius and Sulla, and by that, between Pompey and Caesar. The power of the Republic was contended between two groups of aristocrats, the Optimates, representing the conservative part of the Senate, and the Populars, which relied on the help of the urban populace to gain the power. Caesar identified himself with the Populars, led at this time by Pompey and Crassus. In the same period, small farmers became bankrupt, and the establishment of large slave estates provoked the migration to the city of a large number of people. Continuous warfare between these two groups made it necessary to organize a professional army, but instead of it being loyal to the Republic, it was loyal to its chiefs. It was due to these wars of the second half of the 2nd century, and during the 1st century BC, that wars were fought abroad and at home. The Senate was always in possession of power because they held office for life. It was Pompey and Caesar who began to challenge their position in magistrate office. Pompey had succeeded in annexing Armenia and Syria to the Roman dominions, and subduing the Jews and captured Jerusalem. When he had finished his work in the east, in 62 BC, he returned to Italy after disbanding his troops at the border, and entered Rome as a citizen with political influence, seeking that he should be ratified by the Senate, and his veterans be apportioned certain lands for his acts. However, during his absence, the senatorial party had pursued in every way, and in their power, to destroy Pompey's influence in the city, and further tried to ruin the friendship by turning him and Caesar's relationship to jealousy, and distrust against each other. While Pompey was away on his missions, Caesar's influence and popularity rose to prominence in Rome, and Caesar became not only favorable with the people, but also popular, while Pompey only held power in military. The Senate therefore refused to ratify Pompey's acts, and turning against the aristocratic party, he formed a close alliance with Julius Caesar, and Marcus Crassus in 60 BC, against the Senate. The coalition was known as the First Triumvirate. The Triumvirate obtained land for Pompey's veterans, and ratification of his actions in the Near East that the Senate had refused to give him. Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus were united, and they established a power that nearly destroyed the power of the Roman Senate forever. Pompey had broken with Caesar in 54 BC, was defeated by him at Pharsalus in 48 BC, and was assassinated when he arrived in Egypt. He had great military ability but was weak in politics. Crassus invaded Mesopotamia, plundered the temple at Jerusalem, provoking the Parthians and starting a war. In 53 BC, he was captured by the Parthians and he and his son was killed at the Battle of Carrhae. Caesar then became ruler and dictator of Italy in 48 BC, and he was made dictator for life in 44 BC. Caesar's actions were generous and moderate, but his excessive powers and almost imperial honors led to the group of conspirators headed by Brutus and Cassius, who assassinated him. They stabbed Caesar to death in the Senate chamber in 44 BC. No sooner was the first triumvirate was broken up, a second triumvirate political coalition developed among Mark Antony, a Roman general lived from 83 to 30 BC, Octavius, lived from 63 BC to 14 AD, and Lepidus, a Roman statesman who formed the second triumvirate in 43 BC. Lepidus was ousted by the other two in 36 BC. After Caesar was murdered, there followed a political struggle between Mark Antony, Octavius, and Lepidus. Mark Antony, a dedicated friend of Caesar, seized control in Rome. A second triumvirate was formed after much negotiation consisting of Antony, along with Caesar's great-nephew and heir, Octavian, and Lepidus. They murdered 300 senators and 2,000 equestrians. Among those killed was the prominent Cicero, an author and orator. The main conspirators, Brutus and Cassius, self-seeking men and extortioners, fled to the Near East to form a large army, collected 10 years of taxes in advance from Hellenistic cities, and raised enough money to fight a lengthy war. However, this caused much suffering in the already troubled Hellenistic world. Antony and Octavian assembled armies and went to Thrace, where they fought 2 battles against the conspirators at Philippi. However, the conspirators committed suicide. After Philippi, the members of the Second Triumvirate divided Rome's territories among themselves. Antony took Egypt and the Near East, Octavian took control in the west, and Lepidus received Gaul and the rest of North Africa. Conflict now developed between Antony and Octavian, just as it did between Caesar and Pompey. Obsessed with Cleopatra, Queen of Egypt, Antony abandoned his wife Octavia, and broke with her brother Octavian. Octavian and the other leaders in Rome became concerned over the situation developing. They became concerned over the armed power of Egypt and the shrewdness of Cleopatra. Many believed that Antony would move the capital of the Roman world from Italy to Egypt. Octavian prepared for war, and the battle between the forces of Antony and Octavian was fought in 31 BC at sea, near Actium off the western coast of Greece. Octavian defeated the Egyptian ships of Antony and Cleopatra at Actium, and they fled to Egypt, where they committed suicide. The huge territories of Rome then rested in the hand of Octavian. He became the first Roman emperor from 27 BC to 14 AD, after his victory over Antony. At Actium 31 BC, he was sole master of the Roman world. He was granted the name Augustus as a title of honor. He received inclusive powers previously divided among several magistrates, and his strong government brought peace and prosperity to Rome, long torn by civil wars. His greatness showed itself in major internal administrative reforms in social and financial agencies, in public works, grants for improved agriculture, restructuring of the army, and inspiration of the arts. He was succeeded by his stepson Tiberius. It was during this period that Rome had expanded its borders throughout all of Italy, and it was in 63 BC, Judea became formally subject to Rome. Rome's empire became the largest ever known. The reign of Augustus indicated the end of the Roman Republic, and the beginning of the Roman Empire, the termination of senatorial rule, and aristocratic politics, and the emergence of one-man rule. The Emperor Octavian, who was also known as Augustus, became the Emperor of Rome in 27 BC. He was still the reigning emperor at the time of Jesus' birth. Thank you for listening. If this video has been a blessing to you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks.